So oftentimes people are asking, well, how much does it cost? That's the typical question we're going to ask, is how much does it cost and how long does it take? So here we want to address how much does it cost. When you're considering a project, fundamentally there's three areas that you will consider in your cost category. So as you're considering your project, think of these three things. These three elements help moderate cost. So regarding a project, we have what's called the scope of work. Now, scope can be defined as the design and the size. So depending on the scope of your project, that will help moderate the cost. So scope is the size, scope is also the design. So consider the scope of your project regarding cost. The second area is what type of materials are you using? So material cost also affects the bottom line cost of your project. For instance, is your cover material going to be polycarbonate? Is it acrylic? Is it roof sheathing with shingles? That all varies in the cost of your materials. So material costs vary greatly depending on the design of your project and the effect that you're after. So that's the second element that will moderate the cost. The third is labor. So if you're doing this yourself, you're certainly going to save on labor. If you're having someone help you or a contractor to perform labor and they're doing all of the above, labor is also the third area of cost. So labor affects the cost of your project. These are the three areas that you want to consider when you're budgeting your project of how much it costs. We'll go into each of these areas and give you some further information. But this is the things that we want to consider when we're trying to moderate the cost of a project. Let's take a look at the one item we talked about regarding the cost of building a patio cover or pergola, an outdoor structure, and that's called scope. So how we would define scope is, what is the size of your project? So the size is going to be reflected in the total material cost and the labor to build that. So if you have a 12-foot by 16-foot cover, that's a lot different than if you're building a 20 by 24-foot cover. So these are just things to consider when you're reflecting cost, is the size. The second is, how are you going to design your cover? So the design would take into account, is it what we call a flyover patio cover? Is it a gable end patio cover? Is it some other type of project? Is it a pergola? So the design is going to influence the type of materials, the quantities of materials. So again, we refer to this as scope. And then the third area, and this is often overlooked also, but regarding scope, is what areas of the house or the structure are we touching? So the more areas you're working in, of course, this influences the scope. So how many areas are you touching also affects what we call scope of work. And these are the things that you want to consider when you're budgeting your project. It's not that you're not going to do it, but you carefully want to consider these three elements when it comes to scope of work. The second area that we would like to talk about today, and also to help you understand when you're budgeting, is material cost. So as you look at the ledger column, kind of coming up with, okay, this is kind of what we'd like the scope to be this. Now you have to determine what are your materials that you're going to be using. Again, these are the areas of your project that are going to influence cost. So just consider this in the materials. What's the dimension of your materials? A 2x6 costs less than a 2x8, 2x10, 2x12. Your beam sizes also 4x6, 4x8, 4x10. This is the dimension of your materials. The material costs vary regarding the dimension. You don't want to under-dimension a project. You don't want to skimp on the dimension and then be sorry at the end because your project is deflecting or sagging because you were skimping on the dimension of your lumber. So be careful if you're, trying to figure out the span of things. Make sure it's appropriate. Don't feel like you want to skimp on that. we like to say once and done. So you want to build your project once and not have to revisit it. So consider the dimension of your materials. The second is the species of material. Cedar cost is going to vary versus fir. Douglas fir varies considering southern yellow pine. And there's different materials in different regions of the country depending on where you live. So consider what species of wood you're going to be using. Then the third area is what type of finish are you going to have on that material that you're building. You can have a painted finish, or is it a stained finish, or is it natural? So the finish that you put on the wood is also going to influence the cost. Are you doing the finishing, or are you hiring someone to do the finish for you? You want to consider that when you're budgeting. And then you want to consider the type of hardware that you're using. There's many ways to build a project, many different applications of hardware. So consider that when you are scoping your project out. And then the final one is the roofing. Are you going to build a pergola with no cover over the top? Are you using polycarbonate? Are you using acrylic? These are terms that you may not be familiar with, but familiarize yourself with the type of material that you're using for your roofing. Some people want to match the cover of their house. They want to use composition shingles or tile roofs. So these are the things that you consider when you're scoping out the project. It's not as daunting once you understand the applications of material that will affect the final cost. So the third area of project cost is labor. This can be the most significant cost savings or cost of a project, depending on how you're going to do your project. The first area of labor you might consider is DIY. DIY stands for do it yourself. So this is the primary area of a project that could save if you had that ability or life experience. And also life experience says, well, I'm not doing it. I'm going to have someone else help me. So that's always something to consider in cost. Second area is, well, maybe you want some help with your project. So you might, what we call subcontract or partial labor. So part of the project, someone else is going to help you with some technical aspect of the project that you're unfamiliar with or you're not sure you want to do. In that regard, you can do part of the labor. Let's say you wanted to finish the material yourself and didn't want to hire a painter to do that. You could certainly do that part of the project and save some costs. This is also what we refer to as, in the contracting world, as owner participation. So you're helping part of the project cost. And then the third is having the project general contracted. This person is responsible for your project from the start to the finish. Perhaps you've come up with a design and they're going to take care of the build. Perhaps you're going to hire them and they're going to do the design, the planning, the permitting, and the whole build. And often people do this, but you just want to consider scope of work, materials, and labor. These are the areas to consider when you're putting together the cost of the project.